Warning. The following show features some pretty mind-blowing, universe-shattering hot takes that may cause a serious existential crisis. If this is your first audio crack listening experience, I recommend you start with episodes 1 or 4. I cannot stress enough that this episode is only for the mentally resilient. Liberals, you have been warned. By continuing on with the episode, you now consent to be audio cracked.
If you could explain, what is the crack?
The crack. How can I have the crack? What's the crack?
What is the crack? You are the crack.
Welcome back to Audio Crack, and we have a reoccurring guest. You will remember him from episode 6. And if you're listening for the first time, I recommend you go back and listen to episode 6. We have Ashton Forbes on. You may have remembered Ashton for giving us some really, mind-blowing information regarding the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 disappearance. Honestly, after that interview, it has changed my worldview immensely of just exactly the capabilities humanity has when it comes to science, tech, physics, whether this is the only dimension in existence. But Ashton, thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, thanks, Billy, for having me on. I really appreciate you helping get that information out about the missing flight.
So just following up from when we last spoke, I did my own due diligence because, when I saw people posting, this is totally made up, this is totally CGI, I then went to do my own due diligence and looked at there was the one red herring. I don't know if that's even the word, but what they say shows that the whole thing is fake is that there's one clip art image that they can't even source from pre 2014 when the video was out, and it was from 2016. So I'm like, wait a second, if you're going to make that leap that this thing existed on the internet before this even happened, then how do you combat that assertion about this two clip art images that they can't find pre the video?
Yeah, there's this cloud image that's out there, and they say, oh, somebody used this as the background. Somebody took this from an airplane, and the where this image came from is highly suspicious. The people who think the stuff's fake think, well, they can fake all these videos that have no discrepancies anywhere in them, but they can't fake a picture of some clouds, which seems kind of absurd to me, especially because if those videos are real, the United States government would do just about anything to hide them. Posting a picture of some clouds from the real satellite videos that are out there onto someone's computer is trivial by comparison of actually how they would create both of these videos. There's somebody else out there that says, oh, well, there's some VFX from a stock effect from an old 90s video game that's out there. And I first asked people, why would somebody use a 90s video game asset in these videos that are scientifically accurate, that you have to move it and reshape it and distort it and all this stuff that's never been done to that asset before? But the biggest way to combat it is by scientific means. So people can watch my live streams. I did one actually last night at the time of this recording, which was a re-review of my interview with Navy and Space Force engineer Salvatore Paez. And when I interviewed him back in November, I didn't even know any of this science and how it worked or the history of it. And I rewatched it. I am absolutely 100% sure that the US military has gravity and space-time manipulation technology. He explains how it's possible. He explains the history of the suppression of the science. It goes back to James Clerk Maxwell when Oliver Heaviside reduced his equations. And I've been digging around through scientific papers from people like Ning Lee, Bob Baker, who's passed away. Both of them have actually passed away. Gary Stevenson actually wrote some papers with Bob Baker, and it's all about high-frequency gravitational waves, what they can be used for, including propulsion, communications, other means as well. Guys, it is all just out there. That's what I want people to know. Those videos are real. Those are real leaked military videos. That's why there's no discrepancy on them. And they're potentially the biggest leaks ever, the most important story potentially of humankind to date. So whether or not people believe it or not, I don't really care. I think that the issue is we have to wake people up to understanding this technology is real. So that's why I wanted to talk with you today, because I just keep doubling down on it. And the next thing is that I found somebody, an entity out there that has a real Overunity device, which people would colloquially, sorry, I butchered that. I'm not an English master here, but refer to as a free energy device. Free energy device is a device where you can plug it in to get it going, unplug it, and then it will run forever, but not just run forever, because then electrical engineers will say, well, you can plug a load into it and then it's going to slow down. Well, this one actually produces more energy out than it's taking in. And then so you can feed that energy back into its own system. And while it's unplugged, it just produces energy. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody's just going to get everything for free. A lot of people think, oh, well, free energy means that energy should be free. Well, to produce the device, it still costs money, but that's just a huge step that goes to show that there is science out there that the black projects know about, the special access projects in the military know about, but we as the public have no.
I got to be a skeptic. My physics teachers always told me that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, that in a closed loop system, there's no way you can basically create energy like out of nowhere. How can you explain this in terms that, an average high school physics 101 student can sort of understand of how this works?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Billy. So you're talking about the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And then the second law of thermodynamics essentially says that you can't produce a perfectly efficient system, nor can you get more energy out than what you're putting into your system. But there's a key word that you said there, in a closed system. What about an open system? So imagine, just real quick, the idea of a windmill. Where's the power from the windmill coming from? It's coming from the wind, it's coming from the environment. So now it becomes a matter of, like, how do you draw your boundaries of what your system entails? And you say, well, it includes nature. That's what solar and wind would say, is your system now includes nature. And our system here, when we open it up, we're including the idea of the energy that's in the vacuum of space-time all around us. As now we're bringing back this idea of the space-time ether. There are quantum fluctuations, and we know that we know there's energy out there because we have something called the Casimir effect, which would say if you take two plates and put them close together, there's an attractive force. Well, where's that energy coming from? Physicists would say, it's coming from the virtual particles. Well, where are virtual particles coming from? What even is a virtual particle? This is just physics trying to explain something that we've forgotten almost 100 years ago, which is that there is a medium, the space-time ether. And that space-time ether potentially represents an ocean of unlimited energy that we can tap into. So for the second law of thermodynamics, we can create a non-equilibrium system. An equilibrium system would say you create your closed system, and then you can only get in, whatever you get in, you lose a little bit of energy to entropy through heat, and then you get out whatever's left. So solar panels are like less than 30% efficient, so you're losing a lot of energy due to heat and due to entropy. Now, in a non-equilibrium system, a negative entropy system, you have your system again, but now you're getting excess energy from your opening your system up from the environment. And now if you're getting excess energy in and you're putting a little bit in, you can add that up together. You have a certain coefficient that is, or a variable of how efficient it is. And then you're getting out a certain amount of energy as well. You can feed that energy back in. And this is how you can create that type of system. So the things that people need to understand is, how do you define your system? How do you define your open system? And then with respect to the first law of cannot create or destroy, we're not creating energy, we're borrowing energy. So remember, the Casimir effect exists. We know there's energy that's out there. The question is, how do you tap into it? So imagine that those virtual particles that are constantly popping into place, those quantum fluctuations in the vacuum, those represent, imagine like an oil field, and you see the oil seeping through the ground. Well, is that all that we're limited to? No, we can put a pump into it, and then we can pump out oil out of the reservoir. Now, we're going to do this same thing to the ether, but we're basically going to be taking little teaspoons of energy out of a vast ocean of energy, because the universe is extremely big. Even though we are on this giant planet that seems large to us, we are infinitesimally small compared to the size of the universe. So this represents this idea that we aren't going to be creating that energy. We're going to be borrowing it from somewhere else. So this is how we can get around the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And if this device works, which I've been told how it works, I've seen how it works, I've signed an NDA related to it, then we are going to have to at least reimagine the first and second laws of thermodynamics.
Well, I guess so. From your definition, the entire universe within the edges of the Big Bang that's still happening is the closed circuit, or not closed environment. So that's wild. Now, thinking about borrowing the energy, is it literally borrowing as in taking and giving back, or is it just straight up extracting the energy like we would from wind or hydroelectric, like where there's something running through and powering a turbine or powering some sort of uh, electrical magnetic production?
Yeah, well, I would say that imagine like the water system, where water becomes steam and then it goes and condenses and then it rains back down. This is same as how the system between the space-time ether and what we perceive as reality are all around us functions as well. Is where does the heat then go off to? It goes off into outer space, it dissipates. So you can imagine that we have this system of energy that, and maybe that's where all the mass and energy that we see around us comes from to begin with. And perhaps like even stuff like our sun is tapping into this. Maybe we don't understand the mechanics of fusion as well as we think. I would argue that a lot of this cold fusion research that's been going on, they're creating these tokamaks as well, that they're all tapping into this same underlying ocean of energy that's out there. And that's how they're able to produce what we refer to as overunity, which is coefficient of performance greater than one. Once again, a system where you have an open system that is getting out more energy than you're putting into it locally because you have this non-equilibrium. So yeah, I think that that's the main idea. And just to add more onto it, I'm going to be even more controversial here. I'm not even sure about the Big Bang anymore. And I'm somebody who was all in on conventional physics a year ago. But now, if you add this idea of the space-time ether, where we have this medium that can propagate electromagnetic waves, and all waves require a medium, then you can have this idea where what if it's not that everything's expanding out, but that the tired light hypothesis may be correct, where light is losing energy as it traverses through space-time through extremely long distances. And as it loses energy, it becomes redshifted. So that could also explain it. And the reason why I think there's support for this is up until about a year or two ago, we used to think that the universe was 13.7, 13.8 billion years old. And then we sent James Webb Space Telescope into the sky, and it looked back and was thought, oh, wow, there's galaxies that are way too formed, way too advanced, complex, that are very, very far away. And now people are saying, oh, well, it's 26 billion years old. Well, we just added 13 billion years to the age of the universe. Like, how accurate could it have been then? So this is where we are really kind of pushing it. And what I would say is that this idea of the space-time ether, this energy that's out there, if you were to add all that energy up, I would argue, and I think Thomas Bearden, who's somebody who I've researched quite a bit, would argue that this can explain dark matter and dark energy. And it can explain why we have this extra stickiness when we look at galaxies out there, where the stars don't just fly off. Instead, they stay kind of stuck into their galaxy. And it may be able to explain, if the Big Bang is true, how the universe could expand faster than the speed of light, is that there is this underlying energy. Whereas physicists now have just negated all that energy and said, well, we can't see it, so we're just going to mark it as zero. But you go, well, no, because again, Casimir force shows it's there. So if we add that all up, does that explain dark energy? I have a feeling that this physics is going to close a lot of the gaps that we currently have today in terms of the nature of our universe.
Like applied physics is, there's only like really 4 people in the world that even have the understanding. So if they wanted to, they could just be like, I got to this point and I know too much that I can't even explain it to someone else. And like that in itself, like they're literally at the end of the road by themselves. And at the same time, they could just be making shit up because they like, because they can't find an answer. So how exactly did this line of thinking differ from what we traditionally thought? And when that sort of venture off happened, why didn't that become mainstream? What sort of elements made sure that our conventional thinking when it comes to physics and the universe maintained while this was totally ignored?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first thing I would say is that general physicists that are out there, they basically start from what we've known to be true based on what we've learned in our textbooks, et cetera, and they work their way forward. They try to close the gaps and explain what they can't understand. The problem is we've hit a roadblock over the last 20 years or so, where we can't explain dark matter, we can't explain dark energy, we don't know where quantum fluctuations in the vacuum come from, we don't know where virtual particles come from, but we see all these experimental effects like the Casimir effect. what I've been doing with MH370X, by virtue of those MH370 videos being real, has been working backwards from the answers. We can see the answers. We see an endothermic event, and we go, okay, how is that possible? And we find all the scientists like Thomas Bearden, Salvatore Paez has his patents that are out there, and we've been working backwards from it. And we've been going, well, we have the answers. Let's explain it, and hopefully we meet somewhere in the middle here in the future. But what ends up happening is you get these encrusted beliefs where, especially in academia, people have been going forward and they're too afraid to go look back at their core underlying fundamental concepts that are out there and look back and say, maybe we missed something a while back. And you can go all the way back to like I believe it was 1909 or 1919, Kaluza-Klein. And Kaluza had proposed this idea of an extra dimension, the ether out there, to unify electromagnetics and gravitics together. And even Einstein, I believe, even after general relativity, around 1920, had said, well, he actually started to believe again in this idea of the ether. And in 1885, the Michelson-Morley experiment used an interferometer, and we still use Michelson-Morley interferometers to measure space-time today, deduced that there must not be an ether based on either the interference pattern not shifting. Essentially, they didn't see any medium when they did their experiment. But recently, it was Martin Gruznik out of Germany in 2009 took the same interferometer, had it spin horizontally, and there was no movement of the interference pattern. But then what he did was he flipped it vertically. Horizontally to vertically. And then when he spun it around vertically, you can see the interference pattern move left and right. And when he lined up where the mirrors or where the beam splitter was, he noticed that where you see the kind of equilibrium point, where the shift moves back left or right and it's directly in the middle, is perfectly parallel to this plane of the Earth. And what this then broaches the idea of is, well, potentially there's a connection between gravity and time dilation, which is the distance from the Earth, because the higher up you go,
we need a time out. Okay, so the plane of the Earth.
Yeah. Too deep.
What exactly is that referring to?
Like the flatness of our Earth in general. So if you're not familiar with time dilation means that space-time is not constant everywhere. The more mass you're next to, or the faster you approach the speed of light, the slower your time flows. So what this means is that if we're on the Earth, we're all experiencing time at the same rate because we're all on the surface of the Earth, and the Earth is a sphere. But if you were to go up into outer space, you're going to have less gravity impacting you. Therefore, you're going to have a time dilation effect, meaning your time will flow faster. So what that would look like is if we let's say we take this to the extreme, and this is actually done in the movie Interstellar. I talk about this quite a bit,
right?
Where they go near this black hole. Matthew McConaughey does. And then they leave this planet near the black hole, and while they're on this planet, the tides are 100 feet tall, or stuff like that. They come back and they've only experienced like an hour, but when they go back to the space station that's further away from the black hole,
for that twin astronaut theory, so like there was one twin on Earth, one twin in the space station.
Yeah,
one of them aged more.
Correct.
The one in the space station aged less than on Earth. So that they experience time slower.
Yeah, so it's the opposite, and slower and faster is relative, so that's why it gets confusing. But just what you want to remember is that the more mass you're next to, and everybody's own personal frame of reference, your frame, it looks like you are experiencing time at a constant rate. But for the person who's watching you, the best way to think about it is like this. If I'm on the planet with Matthew McConaughey near the black hole, and I'm looking up at the space station is going to look like it's moving super speed. Like if we were to look at like a fly and you watch the fly buzz around really fast, that's what it would look like to look up at the space station. If you're on the space station and you're looking down at Matthew McConaughey on the planet, it's going to look like they're moving in slow motion, like this. And so that's how you should think about it. And then with respect to the twin paradox, then if you send them up to the space station, they're going to relativistically age faster than somebody who's near the black hole who's aging slower. And so this is where the time dilation effect comes into play. Now imagine that same time dilation effect, but on smaller scales with respect to the interferometer when it's spinning vertically. the higher up it is, you're going to have, less, or you're going to have a time dilation effect compared to when you're closer to the ground or closer to the surface of the earth, because of the tiny amount of less gravity, even going up, a few feet. And so this can then explain the idea that maybe that the time dilation effect and gravity itself is an interaction between the space-time ether and mass. And this is how we can unify the ideas of Einstein's general relativity with the ether itself, is that it's not that the ether is a separate dimension necessarily, but that space-time is the ether, the space-time ether, and that it is a separate dimension. And all the mass that's on the space-time ether is everything that we see around us that's bending that. And so Bob Baker, in one of his scientific papers, would argue that you imagine space-time as a flat fabric, and all the mass is adding little hills and valleys to the fabric. It's warping the fabric everywhere we see it. And that's really what Einstein would argue with general relativity. So we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. A lot of people say, well, if Tesla was right about the ether, then Einstein's wrong about everything and the earth is flat. But that's not true. It's more of a situation of, you can have this space-time ether and we can unify these concepts. We've got enough experimental evidence that says general relativity is accurate. And then we can say, okay, well, let's add on to that yes, we have this space-time, but now this space-time is filled with an ocean of energy that we don't perceive, and that it's bubbling up all the time, all around us. And if we can tap into that, and I believe there's more than one way to tap into it, then we can produce Overunity devices or free energy devices that can essentially extract that energy in various different ways. The way that I've seen is an electromechanical way, but other people may be able to do it without moving parts at all. And this is where I want to start a new industry in Overunity, in free energy, where people come up with different ways they can do it. We can make those processes more and more efficient and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And then we can achieve what I think Tesla had imagined almost 100 years ago, which is a world where we have essentially unlimited, practically free energy for all.
I want to know, we've gone really macro. Like, now let's go micro.
Sure.
If you had this Overunity machine, right? Is that the term?
Yeah. So Overunity is the term that we're using for it. I think it makes more sense than to say free energy, because a lot of people then have this misnomer that, oh, well, it's just free. But these devices are actually extremely expensive to build, at least right now. But I hope that they get cheaper. I'm a business major, and that's like my goal is, can we turn this into an industry where it gets cheap enough that like we can deliver it to third world countries and stuff like that as well.
How large of a device have you guys theorized? Like, what would the use be? Like, would it just be like your average gasoline generator in energy production and size, or is it larger? Is it smaller to charge your phone, or what exactly could we expect moving forward?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So what I'll say, and the reason why I was so excited about this, and if you guys have seen some of my Hard Truths podcasts I've done, seen the people I've talked to, I've been talking to some pretty big heavy hitters that are relatively unknown, but have worked either directly for the government, the Navy, Space Force, people that are DoD contractors, other people that are in the private industry field. And I've been able to connect with an entity through my contacts that has already sold over 30 Overunity devices behind the scenes. And this is where it gets a little bit, sketchy in terms of how you roll this out. A lot of people know about the history of suppression regarding these types of devices. I think Patrick Bet-David did a piece on it. The Y Files did. And you find like the government gets whiff of it. Like they can use the, privacy, Secrecy Act or whatever it is, to take your patent away. They can shut you down a number of different ways, including just making you straight up disappear. So we are really pushing the limit in terms of even trying to get this information out there. But this is why we're not like asking CNN and major TV to put it on there. This is why I'm not asking like big YouTubers to show the device, and why we're not really planning on showing exactly how the device works, honestly. We just want to show it through people who are willing to sign NDAs, who are willing to purchase a device, so that we can get it to enough hands where then it cannot be denied. They can't use disinformation against it to claim that it's not real or what have you. What I can't say exactly how the device works, but I've been told the stuff that I can say about it, which is that it is electromechanical. It does have moving parts. From the size perspective, it can be scaled up or down. So to your question of how much energy it can produce, The example figures I was given was that it was producing coefficient of performance of 2 or greater, which is pretty incredible. People will definitely not believe that. Essentially means it's getting able to get twice as much wattage out as it takes to run. So therefore, you can loop 1 unit of wattage back in, and it's producing a whole extra unit of wattage depending on what your scale is. And that's a lot, because then if you scale that up, you can imagine like how you could be producing a ton of energy. Um, and so again, it can be scaled up or down. The size of it in general, though, for something that would power like a house, all the energy you might need in your house, probably roughly, we've been saying about 3 feet by 3 feet.
Oh
So
my
like the
God.
size of a generator.
So a home standby generator that generates 20,000 watts uh, looks to be like you'd have to keep it outside. It looks like a large fridge on its side.
Yeah, and 20,000 watts is 20 kilowatts. So the average American household uses 25 to 30 kilowatts per day. And just to give people a price range on this, because I've been trying to keep it as transparent as possible, is that for a device roughly that can produce 25 to 30 kilowatts per day, it would be about $40,000 to $50,000. And this is mainly because the materials are relatively expensive, but then there's also extremely specific high skilled engineering required to configure it and build it. And that's another barrier to why you wouldn't just make it open source. And some people out there watching probably going, no, you have to make it open source. Well, I don't have to do anything. And I've already decided or we've decided the way that we're going to do it. There are people that have posted open source schematics. And if you believe in the open source model, I encourage you to go find those and try to build one for yourself and try to pay for it for yourself. Because once you start to get the business and economics, it gets a lot more complicated.
So from scratch, is this 40 to 50K? Like you can make it from scratch, don't need a full production line, like you can just build one.
And so that's the thing too, is that would probably be like you need the production line. So we've got the production line in place already. Now the scale is not very huge. It's a small production line that can produce probably 2 or 3 at a time. But this is another reason why, like, I jumped on this opportunity to sign the NDA. People are like, well, why would you sign an NDA? Well, I've got somebody that's already sold them that I trust implicitly that they are connected and that they've got an assembly line already in place. So I don't have to worry about, here's a schematic, go figure out how to build it. When I watched Thomas Bearden explain his MEG generator from a couple decades ago, one of the big factors, he talks about all the questions people have about why it's hard to commercialize it, the suppression. There's like a tuning that goes along with some of these devices as well, where you like tune them to get the coefficient of performance up. And if you don't tune them correctly, then you're going to have a crappy device that doesn't really produce anything. And this is part of the reason why you don't open source it, because you're going to have a situation where people go try to rebuild it and they fail, and then they claim it doesn't work, but they don't know how to tune it correctly. They don't know how to build it correctly. And so it's a lot more complicated than what people think out there. And then people would say, well, why do they want you involved, Ashton? If they can sell this, what have you, and they've been selling it, why do they need you? And well, if you look at what I've done with the MH370 investigation, the science that I've been researching, like there are the engineers that know how this stuff works, like somebody like me, because I'm out there taking the flak. I'm out there on the front lines of this thing. I'm out there and I'm able to piece together the real science that's out there, while you've got detractors saying that's not possible. Mainstream academia didn't tell me about that, and what have you. And I've got a big audience now, a big following out there right now. And that's an asset. And a lot of the engineers as well are, just put it bluntly, it's pretty socially awkward, and they can't really deal with like all the pressure that comes along with something like this. So this is why I think it's a really good partnership between myself and them, in terms of like, I can help get it out there, explain it to the common people, bring it down to their level, and then get a big reach on it, while they can do the production side of it, the tweaking side of it. And then maybe we can turn this into a real business.
Who is like the target customer that they've been selling to before you got involved and before the scaled up? Is this like some billionaire who wants one in his doomsday bunker, or oh, I nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it for the most part. Like, this is where it started to like freak me out when I've been talking with this entity for months now, and I've seen enough where like I'm convinced this is like, there's like a black market behind the scenes going on here related to this. I'm not going to go into more details, but Yeah, like, people that are billionaires, they have connections, and the world is like not what you know, it's who you know. And so if they're connected to the engineers that work on black projects and stuff that know about this science, that have the highly skilled capability to build these things.
I mean, 50K is nothing. 50K is nothing compared to.
Yeah, to those people, it's nothing. Nothing. To have a free energy device in your bunker, and so if the magnetic reversal of the poles happens, that you've got your bunker that you can go hide in, like Mark Zuckerberg, whatever, that's nothing to them. In fact, they're paying on the much higher end of that. So that's a spectrum. And to your point earlier, smaller devices can charge like your phone, but a lot of people want something that can power like most of their house. It can also be connected to the grid. You can connect it up to your circuit breaker, you connect to the grid, so it can work just like solar panels do, where you can extract extra energy if you're not getting enough, and you can actually feed energy back into the power line, the power grid, so that you can actually get paid back if you want as well. Because what people don't realize as well, if you don't understand power, is like your refrigerator, your air conditioner, your dryer, those things use significantly more power than the rest of your stuff. Like light bulbs in your computers is not very much. So my plan is to go there. We set up to build a demo model. So because all the models that we've been produced they're already out to customers. So I wanted a demo model that we could, show people who are prospective customers, take some videos and images that don't show exactly how it works, show the readings and stuff like that. So I plan to go out there, do that. I plan on having like my phone plugged in, my laptop plugged in while I'm taking the video of it, show the multimeters so that people can see that it's Overunity. But then back to your point, yeah, like not just rich people, but also like connected people. So,
Right.
AKA politicians and things like that happen to know. Like with the MH370 stuff, like I know that there are politicians that have seen those videos and are being quiet about it, and that they have credible information for how those MH370 videos are real. And this is where, like, I just want people to understand this is how it starts to get dark, guys. Like, people know about this kind of stuff and they just don't have any problem
So,
with just
like, let's just say, you come up with a little prototype. Would you ever send it to a podcaster just to like have his phone plugged in every night and just see if it works for like a couple weeks to see how long? Like, yeah, this thing charges my phone every night. Like, it's Overunity.
Yeah. So good question. Yeah, there's a few people behind the scenes, I'm not going to name them, but that are interested in signing the NDA that we've proposed out there, to either purchase their own devices, and if we come to some type of agreement, they can make some statements on the record about it, like, yes, this works, I've been rocking it. But generally right now we're not trying to have people filming it and showing it to the world, so that's why we're being very careful about it. And then we also issued it, or we issued this challenge to the electrical engineering YouTube community, or just influencer community, you want to call it. There's a lot of electrical engineer influencers out there that make content, and said that, hey, if you were willing to sign an NDA saying you won't say exactly how it works, we'll explain to you how it works, we'll show you it, and you can even fly out and see the demo model and test it yourself. But if it turns out that you can't debunk it, you've got to come out and say that the device is legit, and that EtherTech, the name of the company that we started, is legit as well. And then people say, well, if they can't, there's like immediately once I put that out there, everybody's like, oh, the NDA will prevent them from saying it doesn't work. What? No. I mean, they can say it doesn't work if they can explain why it doesn't work. They just can't explain exactly how the device operates. And I understand it's a sticky situation, but this isn't a trick where we're like trying to catch people into, you can't say certain things. No, like we know the device works. So, the thing is with some of these debunkers as well is like, power doesn't flow through power lines. People don't really understand that. Like it kind of flows along the line, along the field lines. And when I posted this Veritasium video, all these debunkers in the electrical engineering community were jumping on it, trying to claim that it's not true, trying to debunk him. And this is what we're trying to avoid. And then Veritasium had to make a follow-up video proving beyond any doubt with an experiment the power is not flowing through power lines. It's flowing along the fields that the power lines create. And this is an important distinction and a difference. Because if you were to build a system that's, let's say, oblong, like hot dog shaped, the power is going to be flowing directly from the battery to the lamp or to the bulb. It's not going through the wires. And he was able to prove this experimentally. And so I don't want to deal with like all that crap where people are like making up these, and somebody's saying, oh, it's leakage current, and making up all these things that are untrue, And so, and this is like people, prominent electrical engineering influencers that have millions of followers. So this is the reason for the NDA.
Are you saying that like if it was a battery positive negative going, so like imagine these headphones are both these headphones, here's a light, and
Yep.
this is the battery right here at the base, that it's not traveling like voltage going this way, it's just traveling straight through the space.
Correct. And here's the thing about it is that the electrons that are moving are actually moving very slowly in the wires. They're moving extremely slowly through these wires. And what they're doing is they're producing electric and magnetic fields as they move. And this is actually how AC current works, because AC current goes back and forth rapidly. So we know it's not the electrons that's moving all the way from over here to over there to get the power over there. They're just creating the fields. And then the electromagnetic fields, using the right hand rule, determine the flow of power. And so if you make a really elongated system like this, and you were to look at the right hand rule at every location around it, what you're going to find is the flow of power is going directly from the battery to the light, and it's not going all the way along the edges. It's creating a field between them. And so if you expand that and you say, okay, I'm going to make my wire system go all the way around the world or something like that, and you say, well, it can't move faster, the light can't, or the energy can't move faster than the speed of light, then you start to realize, like, if you flip the switch on, the light bulb's turning on immediately. But if it was going through the wires, it should take like a whole second to get all the way around. And this is what the Vertasium video shows. In fact, Salvatore Paez, the person who I was talking about at the beginning of this interview, he mentioned that on the podcast, the very first podcast I ever did with him. And I didn't even know what he was talking about back then. And it's funny because it wasn't until months later that I watched that video. Incidentally, people linked it to me. And I went, holy crap, power is not flowing through the wires. It's flowing through fields. And if it's flowing through the fields, then doesn't that mean there has to be a medium in which it's traversing through? Is it just traversing through space? Well, perhaps then again, this is proof of the idea of an ether. And these concepts are really important because it's like Tesla.
I know that light bulbs work because
Sure.
the electric is flowing through the wires and making them glow a certain color. And when they, so
Is that a question? Okay.
Like that is what I think that like, but in sometimes you can see it moving like that when it goes through those filament. Is it the word for?
So it's the electrons are hitting the filament. And so the thing is, you just need your electrons to get excited. So in the Vertasium video, what he explains is that the field flows directly from the battery up towards the wires that are next to the bulb. And the moment those electrons start to shake or vibrate from the field that hits it, then the light turns on. Now, it doesn't get 100% of the power. It's getting a smaller percentage of it, but it's still enough, as he showed, to light a bulb.
But within the bulb, there's like wire made of certain metal that glows when electric flows through it.
Yeah, and you're starting to get beyond probably, I'm not an expert at electrical engineering. I'm just somebody who conceptually understands the concepts at this point, and I'm learning more and more. It feels like in the last 8 months, I only started learning electrical engineering 8 months ago, and it feels like I've already advanced several years in terms of knowledge, but I haven't done it traditionally, so it's been a matter of looking different concepts up, piecing them together, and people are happy. Feel free to be skeptical with respect to it. I don't pretend to be an expert on it. All I know is that I can understand the concepts that are taught to me. And I would definitely recommend people watch both Vertasium videos related to it. He's got 16 million subscribers. He's a really smart guy. I think his name's Derek, and he explains all the concepts very clearly. And then he even addresses all the debunker claims that they try to debunk him on. And the reality is the power flows along near, like on the edges of the wires, but not through the wires themselves, which would imply that they're more of a conduit. And if they're a conduit, where's the energy really coming from? I think that you could argue that that energy is coming from the ether all around us. And if that's true, that even conventional power is really just extracting energy from the vacuum, then this opens the idea up to Overunity, where it's like, okay, if we're doing that, then can we do that in more efficient ways where we can just extract energy from all around us and get essentially unlimited free energy? And not only do I think the answer is true, but I intend on proving it. And if and when I can prove that, I hope people will look back at the MH370 videos, because the only way I would have gotten to this point with all the connections and everything I have now is if those videos were real. And one
Mhm.
last point on the Salvatore Pais thing. I now know beyond any doubt that the reason why he wanted to talk to me so quickly after I emailed him, and every other physicist and engineer I emailed just didn't give me the time of day, is because he knew when he looked at those videos that they were real. And I don't know that I don't think he
Mhm.
engineered those orbs in those videos, but he knew the science right away. And he got excited because he saw somebody like me who had no engineering background that was able to intuitively understand that we were looking at some advanced science there. And he saw something in me that I don't even think I saw in myself at that time. And if you watch that interview, you'll realize right away that it's not a psyop. He's not making this stuff up. Like, he's clearly worked on advanced technology.
I mean, this is some pretty crazy stuff. I need to watch these videos because I'm just trying to think of like when I
It is.
jump my car, like when my car battery's been out, and I'm thinking like, so is it
Mhm.
moving almost like a bubble? Like, is the field like a bubble in like how you can sometimes make gigantic bubbles with like a string, and you see the bubble, the liquid that's like Dawn soap in between the strings. So that's how the electrical field is, as opposed to uh, you know, going through like a pipe.
Yeah, and like what I would say is, if I take, I have this bottle top here, maybe. So kind of think of it like the Earth, where the Earth has the magnetic fields going around from the top to the bottom. Imagine that same thing, but with your battery system like this. Is the fields are going to be flowing through the middle here,
Mhm.
and if it's like this, they're still flowing through the middle, and that's why it confuses people because it looks like they're going through the wires, but depending on the structure of your system, it's easier to see. And then if I were to take my thing here in the middle, this is essentially the
Yeah.
around the edges of this bottle cap would essentially be where the field lines are flowing through space to get to the end point.
Oh.
um, and so that's the way I think people should kind of imagine it. Now, from a electrical engineering perspective, it's all about the right hand rule. So I recommend looking up the right hand rule. The curl of your fingers, or the curl of the magnetic vector, your pointing finger is the electric field, and then this is going to be your vector of the power. And if you do that all along your circuit, that's how you'll be able to figure out exactly where the power is flowing at every given point. And that's how you'll be able to figure out where the power is flowing actually through space time itself
S-
to get to the end point. So it's a very important concept to understand in general. And I think that's where people should start if they are looking at electrical engineering, because that will start you on the foundation of the real science that has essentially been kind of forgotten.
mhm.
And it's funny because when I brought this up and posted that video, I want to say several weeks ago, about the power and not flowing through wires, I had electrical engineers, electricians adamantly arguing in my replies that no, it has to be flowing through the wires. I'm an engineer, I'm an expert. And I'm just there laughing because I'm going, well, just watch the Vertasium video. He literally then followed it up with an experiment proving that it doesn't. Um, and it's just wild because it goes to show that, A, credentials don't mean anything at all. Doesn't mean that you don't know something just because you're credentialed or you have experience. And B, it goes to show how easy it is to suppress some of this stuff. People are adamantly convinced and confidently wrong about how physics and electrical engineering works.
So I'm trying to think of like if you're actually able to produce this, like a device that has almost
Mhm.
unlimited energy that's extracting from the ether. Are you just selling tiny nuclear reactors? Because that that would be a good way to fake it. And
It's a good
honestly, I think a
question,
lot of people
honestly.
would
Like,
buy it.
no. No, and there's no radiation given off by this as well. That was one of the big things people ask is like, how loud is it? Is it going to give me cancer? No, the people that have been producing them, there's nothing that's happened to them. The oldest device has been out there for almost 3 years, and there is like an off switch. Like, it feeds the power back into itself. So if you were to turn that off and cut that part of the circuit, then eventually it's going to slow down and it's going to stop. It's going to stop. So there is a way to turn it off if you want, but in general, the device can run perpetually for years on end. And in fact, maybe in the future, if you're interested, you can come and check it out. I think that would be kind of a fun thing to do. Uh,
I mean, I think a tiny nuclear reactor,
yeah.
generator company would do
Mhm.
would be just as profitable. But like people don't want to deal with it. Just like a little one, just like with some turbines.
Well, here's the thing about the nuclear stuff, real quick, is that a lot of people don't understand. Like, with nuclear power, it has to do with producing steam and then converting it into electricity. And this is why it's very inefficient. It's like we got this big process for converting and then getting to the electricity at the end. And this type of device skips all the middle steps. It's like, nope, I'm just extracting energy straight from the environment. It's electricity right away. And now I'm outputting it. And a lot of our, like basically every power mechanism we have is like, okay, we're burning coal. And then what we're like, and in fact, I'm not even 100% sure if we use that coal to heat up, to boil water, to create steam, but it's very convoluted. And this is why they're very inefficient. I mean, even solar panels, like I was saying earlier on, the average solar panel is only like 20% efficient. And then when you throw them away after 10 years or so, they're toxic and they don't biodegrade or anything like that. Wind isn't much better either. Like I think the whole climate change thing is a scam, not because it's not necessarily real, but because we could solve the problem overnight, and solar and wind ain't going to get it done. They have a lot of negative externalities associated with them. Devices like this don't. And I think there's other ways to produce that might even be more efficient. But part of the reason why I was so excited about this one, in addition to it already having been sold, their manufacturing process in place, is that it is probably, in my opinion, even though it sounds expensive, cheaper than some of the other stuff I've seen out there. There's one that Dr. Greer promoted called like the Holcomb energy generator. And you look at the device and it's like a 4-foot tall stack, which I would imagine, just guesstimating how much it would cost to produce, we're talking hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. And so you want something that's relatively simplistic compared to that. And to your point earlier about like how much power it can produce, I imagine that some of those other devices can produce much higher efficiencies, even like coefficient of performance, greater than 2 even. I even know that's probably hard for people to believe. And some of them probably don't even need moving parts as well, which gets rid of the issue of having extra heat that it's generating. But to me, it's not about like what's the best one. It's about what's the one we can actually bring to the market tomorrow that people can actually afford, and then we can start to make it more efficient. We can look at other designs and other products like that. So right now we're doing this alpha rollout stage where I set up an email address. It's ethertechllc@gmail.com, AETHERTECHLLC@gmail.com, asking for people like the why the people want it, some of their contact information to get a hold of them. And then we're going to be vetting those people to get it down to like 10 or 12 people. We don't have an exact number, but a relatively small number of people that we can trust, that we don't think are just going to immediately like put on a Guy Fawkes mask and show it all over the internet or what have you, so that we can kind of control the rollout. And then after that, we might decide based on the demand, like, do we produce a device that's a specific spec and then try to bring that to a more commercialized market.
So why hasn't someone like ExxonMobil just been like, here's a giant bag. What you're producing is going to destroy our entire industry. We're going to buy you off for $1 billion because we're a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that will shut you guys down and keep their honey pot going, honey flowing from the oil rigs.
Yeah. Great question. I think that that's already happened before to other people. So I think these devices have been out there for decades. And I think that that's already happened to certain people out there, and that's why some of the devices have disappeared. I mean, I've seen patents out there that might actually work. I think the government has also probably stepped in on certain patents and used their Invention Secrecy Act to make it go away out of the interest of national defense. And then I think there's also an element where now some of the people on the government side, like enough of the old guard has died off, and now enough people want it to come out. But with respect to your point, like maybe they will. So like, I guess I'll ask you a question: is if Exxon does show up to my front doorstep even before we can even make the video, and offer $1 billion, should I take it? I mean, I've thought about that in the back of my mind.
If you hit me with some hush money, I'd say yes. if you're willing to like
give you a little taste off the top,
like maybe 5, 3, 2, no,
just enough. Yeah.
That would be pretty awesome. I mean, excuse me. No, I mean, like, why doesn't Biden just be like, Green New Deal? We have this crazy technology. We're just going to actually solve all of the world's problems. Just not enough cash involved.
Yeah, no, I think that's the answer. That's why I think the whole climate change thing is a big scam. I think that the whole energy system is a big scam. And that, the same reason why JP Morgan shut down Tesla. I think Tesla had figured it out 100 years ago, maybe even more than 100 years ago. JP Morgan steps in and says, well, I can't put a meter on that, so I'm going to shut it down. And this is where you start to realize the problem is not one of open sourcing it or the information being out there. It's an economics and a business problem. Is, Tesla couldn't do it himself because he didn't have the investment. He didn't have the money. We don't need investment. We just need people to buy it. We've already got the manufacturing in place. And then if we can get that to work out, then maybe we do investment to scale it up. But that's one of the big reasons why I think this can work, where so many other people have failed. And then some of the other ones are too expensive. So maybe they are selling them, like the Holcomb generator. Maybe they are selling it to the military or other commercial entities in general. I don't really know. Um, but yeah, I think that that's a big factor on it. And then with respect to why the government doesn't come out and say stuff like this, they're the ones I trust the least on a lot of this, especially when it goes back to like the MH370 stuff as well, where like we are hiding. I'm certain we are hiding gravity manipulation, space time manipulation, and we're hiding free energy from the world. And I think one of the biggest issues is the liability. Like people are going to freak out. Number one, some people's minds are going to break, like just straight up break, where they realize like, oh, I've been getting lied to my whole life. Now people that do like conspiracy type stuff, those people are going to go, I was right, haha. But the people that have like believe the government never tells a lie, like those people are going to, like, it's going to break their minds. And then the liability of like, okay, well, we've been stealing airplanes and we've been suppressing this technology. Like, who's at fault for this? Like, people are going to want to sue. People are going to want criminal charges. So we're in a sticky situation now where like they've been lying for so long. Like, how do they even come out with it? So that's probably why I haven't been silenced or quieted, is that they're like, well, let's just let this guy take care
So
of
like,
it,
do you think that the
He'll take
US
the heat.
is using this technology in submarines that like they're not all nuclear submarines? They're now just a couple of these perpetual, not perpetual motion, but perpetual energy machines. And that's,
well, nobody's asked me that question directly as you just did.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. I have it on pretty good authority that they absolutely are using these devices on stuff like submarines, for example. Why? Well, because it's very quiet and hard to detect. And what's the best part about a submarine? You don't want to be detectable. So I'm going to be very careful here because I really don't want my plane that I get on in a couple of days to get orbed out of the sky. But yes, I think that this devices might be in use by the military. Devices like this, let's say.
People in the military, just from Barstool, because a lot of the military are stoolies. And like, I've met a couple guys who've been on subs and they're electrical engineers in a lot of cases. And, their job is to like make sure the toaster's working and like make sure, but there's like full stuff that they're like, yeah, we can't say shit about this. Like while on subs, there's places in the submarine that we are not allowed to go. And when they talk about that, I'm like, well, it's just all nuclear, right? Like that's what I'm thinking. But I'm like, yeah, but like, isn't like nuclear power like pretty open source nowadays? Like how to like make a reactor? And honestly, I was like, how the hell does a reactor fit on a sub? But this makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. And you'll find too, if you look into high frequency gravitational waves, there's quite a number of applications that are also relevant to subs, like communication, where it can just the waves can transmit right through the medium of the water and traverse at the speed of light. And then that's basically a communication mechanism you could use with a submarine that can't be intercepted at all. So yes, I think that submarines are very interesting. I would love to look at some of our more advanced submarines and take a look behind all the locked doors there. I have a feeling you will find Overunity devices, and I have a feeling you'll find communication mechanisms that the public has no idea about. But that was a great question, Billy. Nobody's ever asked
Now,
me that.
last
You were on
question,
point
like,
with that.
what do you say to everyone right now who's like, you're lying through your teeth? There's no way any of this could be real. Like, why do you think you have this technology? And like, there's going to be a lot of that. And, I don't think the possibilities of this is so there in the way you describe it. Like, no, the universe in our Earth is not a closed system. So, there may be some wave we can ride that we just haven't tuned into. What do you say to those people?
It's a great question. Well, first thing I would say is that I've had my fair share of doubts with respect to a lot of it, even though the people that I've been working with, I trust more than anybody else. The stuff I've seen that I haven't even disclosed to people, pushes me over the edge on it. But it's just so incredible that you always have to doubt from that perspective. I think that I'm in an extremely blessed position to be doing what I'm doing. I think that I happened across two of the most important videos ever, and because of the way that I disclosed those, it opened doors up that wouldn't otherwise been available. I also think the fact that I have no NDAs, which has allowed me to piece everything together and expose it publicly because it's all open source, is one of the mechanisms to allow this to happen. There isn't really anybody else like me doing what I'm doing out there at the moment in terms of exposing this technology from open source information that's out there. And then if you really do doubt, this is why I bring up, watch the Hard Truths podcast that I did on my YouTube channel. It's at Just X Ashton. Specifically, watch the one with Salvatore Paez, and then watch the one with Salvatore Paez and Dave Rossi. If you understand physics and engineering, you will understand all the concepts that he talks about. You'll understand the historical scientists that he refers to. And then you will see for yourself. You can check the math. It's out there. It works. He even goes through all the equations. I think that for a lot of people, you have to put in the work yourself. So many people in this world just want to be told what's true or what's not. And this is what's kept us held back for so long, is that the science influencers in the public don't really know crap. The people that really are in the know are the ones that have been working on the black projects, the special access programs. They're the ones that know about science that the public probably won't know about for another 10, 20, 50 years. Scary to say that, but that seems to be the reality. So I would ask, a lot of times what I say is, don't believe me. Don't believe anything that I'm saying. Go do your own work on it. Go look into the stuff that I've been referencing. Look at Thomas Bearden's work from the 80s. If you follow the same path that I followed, I think you'll reach the same conclusion. And if this does work out, then there will be free energy for the world. We are going to try to do our best and maybe at some point open source and show the devices firsthand. But if you know a major influencer that's out there and that they know the science and they want to check it out, they can reach out to me. As long as they sign the NDA, we can show them how it works. We can explain it. They can even come check it out in person as well. But we are not going to move away from the NDA. We are not going to immediately open source this. We are deliberately trying to control the flow of information because what we are in is an information war. A lot of people don't seem to understand that, but that means it's a situation where all this stuff has been out there. We just need to expose it in the proper way.
This is some pretty crazy stuff. I really hope, like, what are some black projects that have been classified and now are out? It's like, yeah, that was what we were working on. That was the type of technology we're dealing with.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the Manhattan Project to begin with. Nobody would have thought the nuclear bombs are even possible until we dropped them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was in the 40s. That was 80 years ago. And yet people still talk about every day about the nuclear weapons that might blow up the whole planet. And I'm just going, that was 80 years ago, guys. Most people are dead that were around with that. You really think we don't have any more advanced technology since then? And the only reason why we even knew about that is because we dropped the bombs. Otherwise, it probably still would be unknown today. The other thing I like to reference is the SR-71, the Blackbird, right? This was 1962 or something like that. That was 60 years ago. This thing could read a book from, I don't even know what the altitude of those things could get up to, 60,000, feet. And then I was looking at this other interview by Paul Size, or Cheeses. I'm probably butchering his last name. Dr. Greer did with him. And he worked for 30 years, 15 years in black projects. He had, I think, 8 years in the Air Force at Wright-Patterson. He's just openly talking about, we had planes in the late 90s, early 2000s that could go 14,000 miles an hour. And that people didn't even realize some of the stuff that was out there that are calling UFOs was crazy advanced projects that, the military was working on. It just hasn't been disclosed to people. And so these are the types of things where, we have to force the stuff into the open. People say, well, how do we get it out? What I'll tell people, the people with the UFO people or whatever, these UAP hearings, these bills they're talking about, never going to accomplish anything. All of the information's in private industry. They've put it there intentionally to shield it from FOIAs, to shield it from any type of oversight that's out there. That's why we can't pass any audits that are out there. Unfortunately, sad to say, people in the government know it's real. They're never going to reveal it that way. The way that it gets revealed is it becomes self-evident. We get enough people in the public in America to understand that we have this kind of technology. And then once enough people realize that we have it and we're hiding it, it'll automatically naturally come out. Then people will start to admit that it's real, et cetera. That seems weird, but that's the real way the real world works, actually.
China and India produce 70% of emissions from these old fossil fuel like productions. Like, why these people who care about, the earth, global warming, have they just given it to them and hoped that they produce it themselves? But it's because like the military capabilities.
Yeah, well, what I would say too is that when it comes to the technology, there's two things that people need to know that people don't know in the public. Plasma physics and condensed matter physics are so much further advanced than what the public thinks. And that can lead to stuff like low energy nuclear reactions and cold fusion and magnetic monopoles as well. And then the other one are semiconductors. Like, if you guys just go, if you don't believe me, the first thing I would say is go look at the stock prices for semiconductors. Like, go look at NVIDIA over the last 6 months. Go look at NXPI, who bought out Freescale Semiconductors after the plane disappeared. Go look at what their stock prices look like over the last 10 years. Take a look at the tariffs that Biden administration in the United States has put on semiconductor industry. Go look at how much money China is investing in semiconductors, $160 billion investment in semiconductors. Semiconductors and superconductivity is what enables magical technology. It's going to get out to the public eventually. It's just on a very slow drip type disclosure, but you can see the signs all out there. And the price of these companies are going up, skyrocketing, because some people are knowing that it's out there and they're investing early on. Even myself, just quick disclosure, I did invest in NXPI and I'm very happy with my investment currently. And this is not stock advice. And then, the whole like trying this war that's going on, like why China wants Taiwan is most semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. Why we're protecting Taiwan is potentially because we're trying to protect that manufacturing line, that supply line. So it's pretty wild, man. Like the technology, all this stuff has just been in the open this whole time, and that's what's blown me away. And that's why I tell people, don't listen to what I'm saying. Just go look for yourself. Like, it's all in the open. It's all out there. People just have to take the blinders off and they have to wake up.
So last question, and I don't know if this goes into too much of specifics, but is there any elements used in the machine that are sort of unknown to science, known? Is it some sort of like element 113 type Bob Lazar thing going on?
Element 115. No, I do feel comfortable saying that there's no secret metamaterials that we've got to produce using the secret Colonel's recipe or whatever to make that are out there. We don't have any of that going on. So that's not the drawback in general. And I can't go into specifics about why the certain parts are expensive, but for people that do engineering, they know that producing stuff isn't generally cheap unless it's a very, very simplistic type of thing. I mean, even just look at something like your phone, like this iPhone, I think retails, this is like the 14, I think, retails for like $1,500.
How many conflict minerals are in this thing? Yeah.
How many blood
What's
diamonds
the downside?
Do we have to put in there?
How much cobalt is needed?
Yeah. No, I think that's the beauty of it. I've asked the entity that I signed the NDA with a lot of questions about, like, how sure are we that it's safe and, it's not going to produce any radiation. The energy levels that it outputs are not high enough to like bend space time and to like make the thing lift off the ground. That's where like you need to have extremely high voltages to pull those anti-gravitic type effects. And that's where it goes to show you that even though we have all this energy going in like our houses or what have you, it's still minuscule compared to what's possible. For something like warping the plane away, you need energy levels that are scary high relative to just, if you just want to power this stuff in your house, that's like nothing. So, imagine again your tiny nuclear reactor compared to a giant nuclear reactor. Well, you don't want to be next to the big one, but a small one, you're fine if it's in the other room or what have you. So there's not really any known downsides at this point towards the device. I think the biggest downside is maybe it just makes a little bit of noise because it's got moving parts, but put it in your basement or whatever, put it behind a door and it's not going to wake.
Thank you so much for coming on. There's going to be a lot of people like, no way he's got a perpetual energy machine. And I'm sure. If it wasn't for MH370, in everything we know about the UAPs, UFOs, like, there is something real that we did not think was real before. So I can't, there was a Harvard study that just said aliens may be living amongst us. Like, Harvard said that recently. So a perpetual energy machine, honestly, I might will it to be true because I think it would benefit the entire globe so much. compared to some other stuff that has come out. So, well, Ashton, thank you so much. Go to your YouTube.
Yeah, at JustXAshton on X, at JustXAshton on YouTube. You can check out those podcasts I was talking about. I'd be happy for you to come later on and potentially see the device for yourself, because I want you to be convinced, and other people and people like you that I trust that are out there. And I don't blame anybody for being skeptical about any of this. Hopefully the confidence and the way I've described it has alleviated some people's concerns. If I wasn't 100% sure it was legit, I wouldn't even be doing this right now talking about it. So if it does work out, then we're potentially going to change the world. Last thing I'll say is my buddy Ian Carroll, one of the best investigators on the planet, he had a phrase where he said, the more important something might be, the more we should look into it, even if it turns out that it could potentially be fake, as opposed to dismissing it and then regretting it later on that it ended up being real. And I think that that's what I would hope people would be at least open-minded enough to say, let's let this play out and see how this works out. So thanks again, Billy. I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody.
Thank you so much.
As well at Barstool.
Crackheads, Crack Maidens, subscribe to the YouTube. Check out Twitter. Subscribe to all the socials. Help grow the pod so that we can keep getting interesting individuals with interesting topics. And we might solve world hunger on this podcast with the perpetual energy machines. But thank you guys so much, and have a good one.